This land is your land, and this land is my land, from the California to the New York Island.
Mike Hill's first experience of the Mariposa Folk Festival was as a kid in Orillia, when he and his cousin made $40 each from collecting empty beer bottles after the infamous 1963 event. But he went on to greater things, joining the festival as a volunteer in 2000 and becoming its artistic director in 2006. In his new book, The Mariposa Folk Festival, A History, Mike tells of the numerous occasions when the festival almost ceased to exist, charts its nomadic history, and celebrates the many characters, artists and dedicated personnel who have made it Canada's premier folk music event. So how did this book project come about, and are there any people who are particularly instrumental in its coming to fruition?
I've sort of been the unofficial historian for the festival, maybe for the last 10 years or so, when it came to writing things for the website. So the history, I was always aware of the history. And then I think Jerry Hawes, who's our publicist and a former president, he works with the book publishers in Ontario through his job at the ministry down at Queen's Park. And he made contact with the people at Dundurn Press. And there was like a mutual sort of agreement that, oh, this would make a good book. So there's a lady named Beth Bruder at Dundurn. She invited me down, and I came down and we had a talk. And Jerry and I, we spoke with the publisher, and everyone seemed to think it was a good idea. So we took off from there, and I was really supported by the board of directors, Pam Carter and all the other people, and the people at York University. The archives, Mariposa archives, are held at the Clara Thomas Archives at York, and they were very, very helpful and very supportive. So I have to acknowledge them as well.
How long did it take?
It took about 5 or 6 months, and I tell this little story. It's not what I'd recommend for any writer. My dog had major surgery the day after the festival last year, and I'd already started the book, but that really gave me time. As I sat with him on my couch for 3 weeks, he had to be sedated and kept motionless. I sat there with my research on one side and my laptop, and I wrote an awful lot of chapters.
So, take us back a little way. How did you personally get involved with Mariposa in the first place?
After the 1963 kind of, quote, riot festival, where there was all kinds of drinking and carrying on in the park, my cousin and I went down to the area. It's down where the Cross Canada Trail is now, and it was just filled with beer bottles. And we both collected about $40 worth of beer bottles, which in 1963 for two little kids was one heck of a lot of money. I was at the one in 1972 where I went to see Murray McLaughlin, and guess what? Joni Mitchell showed up and took over his set. I guess where I really got involved was when it came back to Orillia in 2000. They were looking for volunteers, and I thought, oh great, this is my chance to get a free ticket. And I got reeled into the organizing committee, and by the next year I was the site chair, and then I became what we call the FOG, Festival Organizing Group chair. So I was kind of in charge of organizing the whole festival. And then I replaced the artistic director in 2006. I've been doing that job ever since, and it's like a full-time job.
You were obviously very familiar with the history of Mariposa to begin with, but did you encounter any surprises when you were doing your research?
One thing that really surprised me was how little the performers were paid back in the 1960s. Pete Seeger and Doc Watson were really big stars, and Joni Mitchell was upcoming. They were all paid like $150, $200, like not very much money at all. Something that always surprised me too was that there was actually a movement in the 1980s when things were looking bad financially. Estelle Klein, who was the founding artistic director and probably the biggest name as far as the organization of Mariposa goes, Estelle and some of her followers, they actually wanted to shut the festival down in the 80s. They thought that it was dying and that it needed to be put out of its misery. David Warren and Ruth McVeigh, the founder, Lynn Hurry, they all came back and they said, no, we're going to continue on.
Going back to Jackson, gonna give that train a ride. Well, I'm going all 2,000 miles with Jesus by my side. Gonna see my mama and daddy too when I get off of that train. I'm going back down south again.
Hear that bass.
In your book, you quote Daniel Langlois as saying, "Folk music is changing all the time. It doesn't mean you're sitting on the back porch with a banjo anymore." How has folk music changed since the first Mariposa in 1961?
Well, I mean, from listening to some tapes and just knowing the artists who were there in the early '60s, if you were a singer, you were probably singing traditional folk songs, not stuff you'd made up yourself. And then about that same time that Mariposa started, that's when Bob Dylan came along, changed the whole musical world, and started showing that people could write songs. So Ian and Sylvia, they were among those initial performers. They switched from being traditional singers to being singer-songwriters. So that was a big change. And now, I try to cover all what I call the subgenres in folk music. Blues, bluegrass, country, even some jazz tinges at times.
I'm gonna set this heart on fire. It's gonna burn so bright. I'm gonna set this heart on fire. Bring this world some light. I'm gonna set this heart on fire. It's gonna burn so bright. I'm gonna set this heart on fire. Bring this world some light.
In your book, you also quote a former artistic director of Mariposa as saying, "It's been an interesting year trying to walk the line between art and solvency." You also say that artists are demanding higher fees to make up for revenue lost because of declining CD sales. Will these higher fees pose a threat to the continued existence of the festival?
I like to think that will be sustainable no matter what. Talking about the solvency, though, I mean, even early on, they didn't know if they could do it the next year because of the money. Some years were really, lots of money in the bank. Other years, just like really broke almost, and it wasn't always just paying the artists. And it got to the point, fairly early on, where ticket sales would no longer cover all the costs. So we're at a stage now where ticket sales only account for, I think it's about 40% of what covering the cost. We have to rely on sponsors and on grantors, from the three different levels of government.
Well, it's just was having a great chat with Michelle and John Law backstage, and Michelle looked up and said, "When you started out doing this, did you ever think you'd sort of experience this moment right now? There's Lightfoot on stage. I've always wanted to open for him when he came to the Maritimes. I didn't know I was this popular in Aurelia."
Some people might think that the Mariposa audience is largely composed of aging baby boomers. Is that an accurate picture?
Like in the early '70s, if you look at pictures of the crowd, it was people in their 20s and long hair and brown or blonde hair, as opposed to the white and blue hair that you see now. But the festival is trying to bring in younger crowds. Our folk play is always a big hit with people. A young group like the New Pornographers, for example, are meant to appeal to that younger demographic. And hopefully once we get them in, then they will come back the next year and enjoy it.
This is extremely exciting for me to play here at Mariposa. The first time I ever played in front of people, I was 12 years old, and it was July the 14th, 1972 at Mariposa on Toronto Island. And I played, and my brother played. My brother's here tonight, and the Leahy family are here tonight, and the Good family are here tonight, so it's kind of a family affair. I've never gotten to come up here and play just by myself at Mariposa, so thank you so much to Mike and to everybody for having me here.
What are some of your favorite memories of Mariposa and some of your least favorite?
Well, I mentioned that 1972 festival where, Dave Bedini wrote an entire book about it. I just do it in one chapter, where Bob Dylan showed up because he wanted to see Leon Redbone, and Gordon Lightfoot showed up and sat on a picnic table with the Good Brothers and played. Joni Mitchell showed up, and she brought Jackson Browne along with her too, who at that time was an unknown. I have a recording of the 1964 festival where Gordon Lightfoot is playing at old Maple Leaf Gardens, Maple Leaf baseball stadium at the foot of Bathurst Street in Toronto, and he's introducing his new song "Early Morning Rain," and it's just a beautiful version of it. It's just him on his guitar.
In the early morning rain, with $1 in my hand, with an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand. I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved one so. In the early morning rain,
I think the story of the 1963 festival, where things went kind of wild in Orillia, that to me is one of the most interesting chapters in the history and in my book too, especially for the people in Orillia, because they can relate to a lot of the things. And there's stories of the police trying to nab somebody and put them in the back of the squad car, and they would just go out the opposite door because the police couldn't handle all the crowd.
That 1963 festival was basically a huge crowd of people showing up and Orillia not being really prepared for it.
Yeah, really it was only about 15,000 people at the time, and about 20,000 people showed up, and there wasn't enough food in the restaurants, there wasn't enough accommodation. It was just, it was like a, what do you call that? The perfect storm. There were all kinds of problems. What surprised me was they were so vehemently opposed to the festival and kicked it right out of town. About 3 or 4 years later, there was like an Orillia Folk Festival. It was called, held at the community center, it had Phil Oakes and the Travelers. It was very much a folky. It was very much like a little mini Mariposa, and I was surprised at that. That shocked me because I thought, how did they ever allow that?
Speaking of perfect storms, there have been quite a few violent storms and general bad weather during the festival, but you people managed to have coped with it.
Yeah, a couple of times. 2006 it happened. There was like a freak storm went through Tudhope Park. Hit only that part of town. People at the north end of town, the North Ward, didn't even know that there had been a storm at all. But it canceled the main stage that year. But really, in the 17 years back in Orillia, it has only been a couple of those storms. 1990, it just rained entirely to the point where they didn't sell any tickets at the door. In, I think it was 93, the festival was held at Ontario Place in June, and it was one of those freak cold fronts came through. It was so cold that there was actually snow in the air.
Hello, Mariposa! It is so great to be here. We are called the Next Generation Leahy, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing up here then? Well, none of them are old enough to drive yet, so they're stuck with me, but we consider this a local show for us because we come from Lakefield, just down the road by Peterborough. We've heard so much about this festival, and man, to come and see everyone come with the raincoats and the umbrellas and everything, you're ready for it. Now, are you ready to have some fun?
What do you think has been Mariposa's greatest achievement?
I think it's become like a national institution. You talk to people in the States, who are involved in folk music anyway, they know Mariposa. It's known internationally. We're not the biggest anymore. We were the first. We're not the richest by any stretch of the imagination. It has promoted the careers of so many people. I mean, Gordon Lightfoot, Joni Mitchell, Buffy St. Marie, Leonard Cohen. I mean, all these people would have been big stars anyway, but Mariposa showcased a lot of them when they were starting out. And even with the younger performers, Serena Ryder started off as a total unknown And then each time she appeared at the festival, she was getting bigger and bigger and better known. Matt Anderson's another example, one of the headliners for 2017. I saw him in a room, and I think there were only about 4 people in the room watching this guy play. And I thought, this guy's great. I've got to hire him. Plus, it's a chance for people to see, fairly big names in the entertainment industry. Emmylou Harris, John Prine, people like that who are well-known American performers. People will be able to see like a good long lineup, 50-some performers. And at a decent price. If you were to pay for each of those individually, you'd be paying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Yeah. You get to see them all with your one ticket to Mariposa.
All right. Thank you. Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Been here many times before. Many, many times before.
What is the takeaway that you hope readers will have from your book?
I just hope they enjoy the story. Like, I find it interesting to read stories about the Beatles or about the early history of jazz, for example. And I'm hoping that people will sort of see this as a truly Canadian story, but something that's kind of important to the culture of the country. Not that I'm saying my book is important to the culture, I just mean the actual event is a cultural icon.
You'd better give it a plug, the title and the publisher and when it goes on sale.
It's called the Mariposa Folk Festival, A History, by me, and it's available from Dundurn Press, so it'll be available at Chapters and different booksellers.
Might be on sale at the festival.
It will be on sale at the festival, yes, and I'm willing to sign any and every copy.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.